Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I want to review the trailer that just came out of Starfleet Academy, which is an idea that the powers that be were trying to push for decades. I remember even Gene Roddenberry, when he was alive, he said that the studios wanted to do such a show about a bunch of kids running a starship, and he was against that idea because, he always wanted to show the mature professional officers and how they deal with the problems of the galaxy. But my biggest problem with it is not necessarily the character stuff, but simply because by setting it all in Starfleet Academy on Earth, they immediately limit themselves from the rest of the galaxy. Because, Star Trek at its best was when a starship was going into some far distant corner of the universe and encountering something that no one ever saw before and having to deal with it. That's what made it interesting, because each episode was something new and different and all kinds of amazing things. But if you set the entire show in the academy and make it all about a bunch of cadets, then obviously they will not be sending those cadets to the edges of the universe, and they will not be sending them to the most important or dangerous missions, and so it will be less interesting overall just because of its setting. Now, maybe it's one of the reasons they want to make a show like that. That way they won't have to invent some amazing new science fiction concept that they encounter somewhere on the edge of the galaxy, and they can make it all about the characters and their drama and their soap opera stuff back on Earth. And so that makes me very worried, and also it makes me worried that it's all tied directly to Discovery. Discovery was written horribly. There were so many things that just didn't make any sense, and they are setting it apparently immediately after Discovery, and we see some of the characters like Jet Reno and that Admiral. Strangely, we do not see Tilly, even though in Discovery they specifically said that she will go to teach at the academy, and yet she's the only one we don't see. Maybe we'll see her in the actual show. But we do see Jet Reno and the Admiral, and they look exactly like they did in Discovery. That means it's set right after Discovery. It's not set decades later. And we know that the Discovery ship with its spore drive still exists in this universe. And so whenever there will be some kind of dangerous situation, then I will ask, why don't they just call for Discovery to help out, since they can appear anywhere in the universe? Because remember, they only got rid of the Discovery ship decades later, when Michael was an old admiral and she took that ship somewhere for some unexplained reason. Again, the bad writing of that show. So during this Academy show, the Discovery is still out there. So why don't they call that ship to help out whenever there's some dangerous situation? And so the very fact they set it so far in the future is now kind of problematic, because they're supposed to have kind of too many technologies that can solve any problem. So why do they even need humans if they have all these intelligent droids everywhere? And apparently the EMH doctor is also appearing. That is kind of interesting, simply because it kind of makes it a sequel of Voyager. But it does beg the question, why is he the only one of his kind? How come there are not a whole bunch of sentient holograms running around as people, since they can? And so maybe there were some limitations put on that whole thing, and he was the exception. So maybe they will deal with that topic. Maybe they will actually discuss this topic. That might be an interesting science fiction and philosophical topic to discuss, but I'm betting they will simply never explain it. And the whole style, the whole visual style of it also reminds me of Discovery. There are a whole bunch of lens flares, and there are a bunch of scenes of all these teenage cadets going out into nightclubs and stuff like that. So is that really what Star Trek was about? Most of it looks like it's going to be, teenage soap opera stuff, and that is not something I really want to watch, even if it's set in a science fiction setting. If the stories themselves will not be about the science fiction, at least in part, if they will not actually go into any of those intellectual topics, and I'm betting they won't, then it will not be interesting for me. The only thing interesting is all the member bearers in the background, and there are scenes like that as well. There is a scene in which they literally go into a room of member bearers, and there's a wall of member bearers behind them with a bunch of character names of the previous Star Trek shows. And there's also a scene in which the new Tilly kind of character goes to that museum of member bearers, and she sees some kind of memorial for Benjamin Sisko, and it asks the question, whatever happened to him? And I'm betting we will not actually have any continuation of that story in the show. They are simply using it as a member berry to simply get us excited. And my biggest problem with it is that it basically confirms that Sisko never returned, since this whole show is set 1,000 years after the other shows. And so they ask the question, whatever happened with Sisko? So that means he never came back. So poor Jake and poor Cassidy Yates, because Sisko apparently never returned. Is that really worth it just for a memorable scene to basically cancel any fanfiction or any of the official Star Trek novels that ever dealt with that topic? So this show basically cancels all of that. So Sisko never came back. That's what they're establishing here. And another Deep Space Nine connection is that we see a Jem'hadar woman in Starfleet. So that kind of made me laugh because I immediately remember that scene in Deep Space Nine in which they specifically said that there are no Jem'hadar women. Now, maybe they will explain it somehow, I'm betting they won't, but I guess I can come up with excuses. Maybe the Jem'hadar originally did have women, but because the founders genetically engineered them to be soldiers and were growing them in hatcheries, maybe they didn't need the females because they were basically cloning the Jem'hadar and they wanted the males who are tougher. So that's why there were no women at that time. I'm sure they will not use this excuse in this progressive show, so maybe they will steal from the Orville and maybe they'll have a similar storyline like the Macklans in the Orville, who also in the first episode said that they are only males, there are no female Macklans, and later on they revealed that their females do exist. They were simply kind of an oppressed minority group who they were getting rid of because Macklans apparently can reproduce by laying eggs, which is something I think they stole it directly from that scene of Deep Space Nine, because when Dax hears the Jem'hadar don't have women, she asks, so what do? Do you lay eggs? And the Jem'hadar then explains that they are grown in hatcheries and then grow up in days. And I always assumed that the founders genetically engineered them, that they took elements from other species like the Tosk, who was a creature that was able to make himself invisible, similar to the Jem'hadar, and so maybe they took that trait from that species, and so maybe they took all kinds of traits from different species they had in the Gamma Quadrant and combine them all to create the Jem'hadar. Or maybe the Jem'hadar did originally have females, but they were no longer necessary. And another excuse might be that after Odo rejoined the Great Link, maybe he changed them for the better, maybe he made reforms in the Dominion and wanted to free the Jem'hadar, and so part of doing that was creating or recreating the Jem'hadar females so that they will be able to reproduce normally and that way to be free from the Dominion. So I can come up with excuses, but will the show actually explain that, or will they behave as if that was always the case and never mention the fact that there were not supposed to be Jem'hadar women? I'm betting that will be the latter. And if they do steal from the Orville, that will once again be kind of a lack of originality. So the Orville had that whole storyline of the Macklin females getting free after they were almost eliminated by their male-dominated society who hated their women. They all wanted to be men. So if they do exactly the same thing, that will also be kind of annoying because it's been done. Another interesting detail in the trailer is that we do get to see the Golden Gate Bridge, but apparently it no longer has those solar panels, which I made many videos complaining about, because it always annoyed me for two reasons. First of all, the whole idea that they even need solar power in this future in which they should have so many other ways of generating unlimited power, so why do they have to use solar panels, and why put them on the bridge and basically block any ability to walk on it? And maybe we can make the excuse that, antimatter reactors have to use dilithium, and because they're kind of low on dilithium in this future, maybe they are trying to avoid it. Why shouldn't they have fusion reactors? You will basically have endless energy as much as you want. So what's the point of solar panels exactly? So I was glad to see that the bridge apparently no longer has that, but then I noticed that other buildings in that same shot do still have solar panels. And so that once again annoys me, but at least it's not blocking the bridge on which people can walk on for fun or for the view or stuff like that. So that was extremely stupid all the previous times they showed that the bridge is completely covered with solar panels, including in Discovery. So I guess now it's a continuity mistake because it's set right after Discovery, so how come suddenly they don't have the solar panels? The best way would be to explain that those were never solar panels, but something else that serves some other kind of function. So maybe we'll see something like that, but I'm really pessimistic about the show. I don't expect anything clever from the show because it's the same as Discovery, it's set in the same Discovery verse, and so I have very low expectations of it. There was one shot I did like when they showed the Klingon cadet kind of looking at the sky from the window, so that did make me optimistic. First of all, he looks like a Klingon, not like the Kling orcs from the early Discovery, which they never explained whatever happened to them. How come the Klingons suddenly changed their appearance? They never explained that in Discovery. And that shot reminds me of a Star Trek novel I once read as a kid about Worf being in the academy, And I don't remember much from that book, but I remember specific parts that I liked. For example, he went on a transporter shuttle with a bunch of cadets, and it was like a bus in space, and he immediately went and sat at the very back. Why? Because that way no one can sneak on him from behind. So he was constantly thinking like a warrior, constantly expecting danger, constantly being on the alert, and I kind of like that. It was funny. So that's kind of the only thing I remember from that book, but I remember that I enjoyed it. So when I saw that Klingon cadet, that reminded me of something I once liked. But will they actually make it good, or will it all be a bunch of nonsense and a bunch of soap opera stuff? Probably so, because since they've limited themselves to be set on Earth in the Academy, then how many adventures can we possibly have having to do with new things from out in the galaxy? And so probably it will mostly be boring. We'd also have a shot of the bad guys of the show, and they also look very generic and uninteresting. And the main bad guy is whistling the Star Trek theme. So are they establishing that this music actually exists for the characters? They are self-aware of it, so that also is kind of strange and funny. So I have very low expectations of the show, but who knows, maybe they'll surprise me. So I guess we'll wait and see. I guess I will have to watch that when it comes out. So that's my thoughts on it. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.